Alright everybody, this is a pretty damn important story, and I think we can bring at least a different or interesting perspective to it. It is the Stop Killing Video Games movement, and the overall goal there is pretty damn awesome. I'll explain everything if you're out of the loop though. Now, this movement that is led by Ross Scott of Accursed Farms is continuing, and recently there's a new burst of publicity because of a new crowdsourced initiative in the European Union. Thing is, a lot of people, a lot of countries fall under the EU. If stuff starts happening there, it can actually matter. Just think about the USB-C port on the new iPhones, or all the stuff that's going on with the Digital Markets Act and how that is actually, well, doing things like allowing people to just go and play Pokemon on their iPhone without jailbreaking it. And now, thanks to a very public back and forth between, say, the likes of Pirate Software, Lewis Rossman and more, and just having different, disagreements, different perspectives on whether this is actually good for gaming and consumer rights and also for data protection. It's a really interesting story, and it's important. Basically, it's about rights, it's about expectations, and also it is about principles and practical policy. Because that's the thing, right? You can have ironclad principles, but if they are so ironclad that you're not able to make policy that's workable in the real world, then you run into the problem of, well, you're not actually having that positive impact. And of course, that can be in other directions. You can have policy that has got unintended impacts, and that's the kind of thing that people are talking about. Now, I'm not going to relitigate all of those people's different positions. You can go and look at their videos. What I want to do here is restate the intended purpose of the campaign and then go through how a process like this actually gets implemented in a legal sense. And the reason why is that plays to the value that we can actually add to the discussion. Within my team is some corporate experience at a major firm, so my hope is that that just means we can kind of add to the discussion. Now, obviously, we're not corpos, but if our shared experiences can explain decision-making that is happening, then, well, at least you can know why the bad thing is happening or why something ends up being counterintuitive. That's the goal anyway. It should be a value add, but what I know is a value add is loading screen, and you'll love the latest loading screen that we published. How do executives make games worse? A case study. It's a great read, and Loading Screen is our daily newsletter over on bellular.games. Of course, it'll go to your email and everything too. And basically, the deal is simple at bellular.games. You get top-notch writing and analysis, you get content all of the time, you get our videos ad and sponsor free, and it's where, most importantly, we are building our house together on solid foundations, not a foundation of AdSense and algorithms, which I suppose in that analogy are the sand. So to take a story from the top, this was prompted by Ubisoft turning off servers for The Crew, and that meant that any consumer's purchase of the game was basically completely invalidated. Now, Ubisoft are arguing here that this game was a live service, so turning off the servers and moving people over to The Crew 2 or The Crew Motorfest is a totally fair thing to do. They're going to say, well, guess what? You bought a live service, what do you expect? And of course, Mr. Scott of Accursed Farms does not agree with this, and he frames it in the terms of a customer paying for a product, not paying for a service, right? Paying for a product, a boxed product. And now that product has been remotely disabled, effectively taking it away from the consumer. And I mean, in terms of like emotion, vibes, feeling, and I suppose the principles of what actually seems to be fair and true and right, I mean, that's an extremely compelling argument. Now, of course, somebody could immediately look at this and say, okay, but what about practical policy? Because if you do something and it's way too heavy-handed, could you actually, well, basically reduce competition? Because you essentially mean that, it means that the barrier to starting is higher, the punishment for failure of a live service dying where it just doesn't make business sense anymore, that, that kind of thing could actually damage the market. The thing is, though, he doesn't want that. He does not want Ubisoft to make the game free. He does not want them to give the IP to the public or to bankrupt themselves. Not they'd be bankrupt, but basically pay a cost that doesn't make sense forever. Or say, pay the licensing costs for vehicles in the game forever, right? So he's thinking about the real world. That's why this is actually being taken seriously. What he does want, though, is companies to be responsible for making sure that when these games are no longer sold for whatever reason, that they still function for the people who bought them as a discrete product. I think we all understand the idea of, you don't buy Netflix, right? You purchase time-limited access to the Netflix service. If the Netflix service goes away, well, yeah, maybe you'll lose like 20 days worth of Netflix that you've paid for, but it fundamentally won't be a situation like what we're talking about here. Now, for him, that means a offline mode for a game, maybe custom server code, perhaps, I don't know, being put out to the public with some sort of, fair license. It's that kind of thing. Not the idea that Ubisoft have basically got to go and, carry the bag for all of this. Far more that they put the tools out there, and if the community cares enough to do something about it, they're able to, and the problem is right now they're not able to. So his intent is that basically there is an end-of-life plan from the start of development that does not take away from what people have paid for. That is essentially what the goals of the campaign are. Now, this latest effort here is using a feature of the European Union that could actually see a law on the practice be considered, and that is the European Citizens Initiative. This allows citizens of the EU to propose legislation for the EU Commissioner to consider, and if they approve the policy, then they will open it up for a year-long consultation period with the product, and that's where we're at today, where, and this is pretty amazing, the Stop Destroying Video Games Initiative is an officially registered thing that is asking the EU to prevent remote disabling of products in line with multiple EU conventions. Ubisoft will say, it's not remote disabling. I mean, come on, you can put the disc of the crew in, and there you go, it's ran. Just there's no servers, but whatever, it's the crew. And so the argument that's being made is this is not in line with EU regulations. And if this can get 1 million signatures, or slightly more, once, say, trolls and valid entries are removed, and I mean, you might say trolls, how could it be a troll? It's, people fighting for a right. Yeah, but the thing is, if you try to get past 1 million signatures by, botting or doing something like that, you're basically just giving people, cause to disregard the whole thing. It hurts. We should be able to win good arguments the right way, or at the very least, that's what we should be setting out to do. And so if this gets 1 million, it will go before the EU Commission, and they will consider the potential impact and decide on whether action is required, and that may mean legislation. That now is the job of the team. 1 million signatures from EU citizens eligible to vote. That sure has me thinking. I'm from Northern Ireland, so I'm a British citizen, but also I, by default, have the right of dual citizenship with Ireland, so I don't know. Can I hop across the border inside? I don't know. Anyway, there's a catch. The EU is a federated union of states, and any initiative has got to pass a proportional threshold of interest in at least 7 EU regions, as well as passing the 1 million threshold. So as an example, right, Germany will need 67,680 signatures to count, but Ireland will only need 9,165. And currently, that sure is some upward movement, and it's early days yet. The problem, though, Malta, Luxembourg, those need 4,230 signatures, and currently it could be a little bit challenging because of some of those factors. And that means that this is now a game of marketing, and it's a game not of general, but of regional marketing. And really our degrees of a natural understanding of this will probably depend on the regions in which we live. As an example, if you follow UK politics and how the constituency system works, you understand that, say the Reform Party can get a fairly large vote share, but it is large and diffuse. Whereas, because of tactical voting and, as an example, the Lib Dems running a very, very, what would be called efficient campaign, they've been able to get way more seats, basically because it's divided into the little regions. It's kind of interesting from a game theory perspective, but basically we're in a thing like that now. So it might be fine to win Ireland, to win Germany, but what we need is a strong, if you want this to happen anyway, is a strong ground game in the places that, we're going to call them battleground states. It's just states that are lowly engaged in the issue. Now, the good news is that 1 million signatures and 7 full regions within 1 year is absolutely not impossible. We are making good headway in some regions. From there, though, it goes to lawmakers and experts. People who, of course, may not even think that legislation is the correct path here. They will have lots of options available to them, but otherwise, nailing down the actual detail of how this would be implemented is the challenge, especially because who will they be consulting in this? Well, the process will be consulting affected industries and experts. Now, yes, they will probably look at consumer advocacy groups, right? Looking at the different sides. But here's the thing. Within all of those different sides, who is going to have the best? And now, look, I don't want to say best people in some weird judgmental way. I purely just mean if you consult a charity and then you consult EA can probably afford for, somebody who is absolutely at the top of, at the top of their career, threshold, whereas it's going to be harder when you've got less resources to get people who are as good at playing that particular game, because when you're good at playing that particular game, yeah, you can work at a charity or consumer advocacy group. Sure, awesome. But you're definitely going to have a lot of people knocking at your door saying, hey, we want you. And that may seem spooky or like it's doomed, but here's the thing. We've got to think about the broad direction of travel. When we take a look at that, well, right to repair policies that have recently been implemented. That's one example. The Digital Markets Act. So it's not inconceivable to think that something would be done here, especially when we are seeing plenty of states actually talk up, say, open source instead of closed source in terms of like competitiveness, security, and some things like that. So a future where there's new legislation that means that companies are actually required to meet certain standards of a policy for all future products, that is something that could actually happen. But the key to understand how is that they will act in the interests of consumers while also being understanding, they would say ideally, of the requirements of the industry. And that's why none of these changes are ever retroactive, and basically why they only kick in after the industry has had several years to prepare. And if the EU mandates a change, we know that companies will often choose the path of least resistance. Here's the deal, right? Apple could have put lightning ports on non-EU iPhones. They could do that. But they didn't, because I guess they thought, this is the direction of travel, we may as well do it, this is the better move for probably our customer experience, yada, yada, yada. And when you've got different regional SKUs, it ends up just being a massive pain in the ass, even in terms of things like supply chain management, where you're sourcing things from. It's just a pain. So a lot of companies end up just doing a big global solution, unless it is something that is truly would be a reckoning in their bottom line. That's why when you see Apple and the Digital Markets Act, like, they've complied, but they have complied maliciously. And if you want a direct example of this working for all of us, remember what the Aussies did? So Steam, following the Australian government demanding that they implement refunds, implemented refunds. And now we have refunds in Steam, and that has basically set the standard of what a really good store does in the eyes of customers. And so with this, you can see how these things are rolling out. There is obviously some disagreement out there. I mean, the most notable thing would be, Rossmann, Pirate Software. I don't really want to tread into that. I always operate with the assumption that, in this case, they disagree, but I would certainly imagine that they're disagreeing in good faith. So they're having the argument, they're having the debate that they want to have in public. I'm going to let them do that. You can listen to our video, understand a little bit about the sort of framework of this going through the EU. You can then look at their videos, analyze their arguments, make up your own take. And I think a lot of it, there's those worries with... There's always worries with regulation, because good policy is extremely, extremely hard. And policies having sometimes the opposite of their intended effect, that's a real problem. Now, we want a policy that protects our rights as consumers. The challenge, though, is if that policy then decreases innovation in the market, or perhaps increases a barrier to entry in the market, or maybe ends up just playing to the strengths of the incumbents anyway, then guess what? A policy that is supposed to be good for us actually ends up hurting us, right? A really good example of that is, say if you want a really good business opportunity, there's times where a way to do that, like how do you moat around your product? Well, go to a highly regulated industry, like say the childcare industry. It's hard to break into. And, there are, obviously extremely important legal requirements there. And so that's an example of policy that is absolutely vital and, entirely designed to protect people and enforce standards in a way that creates a business opportunity. Something like, new regulations come in. Guess what? That opens a new opportunity for compliance software, compliance services, compliance consulting. And so when we're talking about markets, we're talking about policy, regulation, it's interesting because it's not just we fix the problem, done. It is tweaking the rules of the game. It is changing the dynamics, changing the ecosystem. And that really does matter. I could rattle on about examples all day, but I'm just going to do one more that is an interesting cautionary tale. Sometimes you can try to regulate a big tech company as an example. And you can end up finding that, yes, the big tech company will go and they'll do some lobbying on the issue, right? They'll lobby, fine, whatever. But then you'll take a look at the final policy and you'll think, man, that really must be a pain in the ass for Facebook. Why would Apple want that? And then you realize something. They have the resources to overcome the new regulation. Somebody trying to break into the market doesn't have the resources. Now, it could be that opens up an opportunity for regulatory, compliance startups to try to fill the gap there, but it actually puts a bit of distance between new disruptive competition and the big tech firms who are able to be regulated and then thrive because they can just overcome the regulation because they have money. So lots of interesting dynamics to think about. Let me know what you think about this issue. Are there examples of, policy backfiring, or maybe even having the right effect as it's impacted your life and the things you're interested in? Let me know. And if you want more content literally right now, click the link down below. That will take you directly to the loading screen edition that I mentioned at the top of the video. Have a brilliant day. See you next time.